Hello charmings, and welcome to Taming a Monster, the series where I take some of Gran Turismo 7's most ridiculous cars to see if I can tweak them so that a talentless pleb like me can handle them without being killed to death. Like any common ruffian, I'm using a bog standard PlayStation 5 controller, and I have all driver assists turned off, except for ABS. Let's see what car is trying to murder me today! Today's challenger is the Skyline R31, possibly one of the most 1980s looking cars ever made, with the RB26 engine from the R34 GT-R upgraded to 960 horsepower. Unlike the later GT-R models, this older GT-SR has to make do with sending all of that power to just the rear wheels with only 5 gears instead of the R34's 6. As usual, all of the upgrades have been applied, including the wide body and body rigidity increase. However, all of the settings are currently default, except for the downforce, which has been maxed, as most players will likely do, and the transmission, which has already been tweaked to suit this engine. The car has aftermarket wheels, one size up from standard. If you fit larger wheels, the car can feel more agile at the expense of stability, and smaller wheels can make the car ride the curves easier. It has a front splitter for front downforce, the Type B rear skirt which acts as a diffuser and adds downforce to the front and the rear, and the big ugly custom wing because it adds more downforce than a Type A or B wing, which is very necessary with nearly 1000 horsepower. If you're interested in learning more about aero, downforce, or any other aspect of tuning your car, I have a series called Tuning for Beginners which covers everything from suspension to differential to the transmission. The testing ground for today was Suzuka against the usual array of 1000 horsepower monsters. The car launched better than expected, however problems began as soon as I reached the first corner, where the wheels hit the arches preventing me from countersteering to save the slide. Oh, for Christ's sake. A few corners later, the car bottomed out again and wouldn't turn at all. Turn, you slut! Approaching the hairpin, the car did the same thing yet again. No. Not doing it anymore. When a car's wheels hit the arches, it's either too low or there's too much body movement, so I increased anti-roll bars and natural frequency to prevent body movement. This time round, the R31 managed to navigate the first corner without trying to murder me, and put in a respectable performance. It did suffer with some understeer, and the brakes did seem slightly numb as well though. Next up, I adjusted the LSD, reducing initial torque and braking sensitivity to make the car more agile. Reducing acceleration sensitivity will also help slightly with oversteer. The car was feeling slightly improved, with better braking and turning. What the hell is a Volvo doing here? On the downside, the car was still very quick to oversteer. The differential tweaks had introduced some slight oversteer when braking as well, and trying to do a slight corner cut dramatically bit me on the arse. Well, I didn't realise my suspension was a bloody trampoline. I increased compression, which usually helps with the bumps. I increased the rear natural frequency slightly more to reduce oversteer when braking. I reduced camber to improve straight line traction. I added some toe in to the rear to help with power oversteer, and I added some toe out to the front to help with lift-off oversteer. Despite the Porsche 959 trying to take me out even when I'm not driving it, Porsche claims another victim, the Skyline was now mostly sorted. I felt that it was about as friendly as it could be given how much power it was making, so naturally it was time for the Nurburgring Test. Initial tests resulted in more wheel arch rubbing and a few choice words, so I had to increase the body height to prevent that. It also has the double effect of making the car ride the curbs better. I also added some ballast weight to the rear to reach a 50-50 weight distribution, which will help with traction out of the low speed corners. The RB26 is an interesting engine swap in the world of Gran Turismo, mainly because of its comparative absence. You'd think it would be a popular choice, like the many LS swaps, the K20 engines, the recent influx of K24s and Chiron engines, or even the rival Toyota 2JZ, but the RB26 is only available in 2 cars, this and the Fairlady Z33 or 350Z. Another thing that stands out is the sound. It's rather quiet. If you've driven this car on its stock engine, or the R33 GT-R, the RB engines sound utterly glorious, but this RB26 is muted, and for nearly 1000 horsepower it sounds a bit pathetic. Still, it's better than yet another K24 engine, or the LS7 drift car engine, both of which I'm getting rather bored of. As for the R31 itself, it's really not very well suited to this engine. I think part of the problem is just how good this car sounds and feels on its standard engine. At no point did I ever drive that and think it needed any more power, but here we are. Despite only adding 40 kilos of ballast weight, it made a very noticeable improvement to the way the Skyline puts its power down out of corners, making the car faster overall. It could surprise you just how much difference a small amount of strategically placed ballast weight can make. However, I still had to be fairly delicate with this car. It was still prone to wheel arch rubbing on extreme compressions, so you may notice me taking the foxhole part of the track quite gently to make sure the lap wasn't ruined. This is a car that generally does not like to be thrown around. In the end, the R31 managed a 6 minutes 22, just behind the Porsche 959 from the previous video. It could go faster with a more talented driver, but then most of the cars here could as well. I just feel like there's a little more in this one than there is in most of the others. So, that was my attempt to tame a monster. I hope my settings helped, or that you enjoyed this video. Join me next time where there's a certain Swedish brick that's now got 1200 horsepower. Thank you very much for watching, and if you're feeling particularly generous, I would greatly appreciate your subscription. Take care of yourself, and ta-ra.